Hi, 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 and hi, hi. Blue, 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 gray, gray,
Put the
gray,
microphone up to
gray.
your mouth and say hello.
Hello, hello.
And can you say, we're going to do a podcast now?
We don't do podcast now.
I'm embarrassed to admit it today, but 5 years ago, I didn't read books. I mean, I literally did not read books. Sure, I had written a couple by this time in my life. Sure, I had a bookshelf. And sure, if anyone said, do you read or what are you reading? I'd come up with, I'd say yes, and I'd name the last book I read or whatever. I wasn't going to say no. I'm sort of sitting on the couch kind of sopping up ice cream and mayonnaise while watching soap operas. I didn't say that. I just sort of did what we all do. And I was like, yeah, I mean, I read a couple books on vacation, maybe once last year. And after enough prodding and pickling from my wife, Leslie, as you may have heard her tell you in chapter 1 of this show, I eventually started kind of picking up my reading again, and I found my brain was slow to adjust back into the pace and the depth of books after being fed a more frenetic, kind of high dose, high quick changing environment of, social media, and never mind newspapers and magazines, and that sort of slipstream of content that we are all consuming today. But over time, I introduced a number of systems in my life, like canceling newspapers, like canceling magazines, like putting a bookshelf up my front door, that helped me read, OMG, 50 books in 1 year, which was staggering. That was more books than I had read in the last 10 years combined. I was so proud of myself that I wrote an article for Harvard Business Review called 8 Ways to Read a Lot More Books This Year. Much to my surprise, but maybe not, because I guess other people felt this too, it became the number 1 article on their website, hbr.org, for something like 6 months straight. It has now been optioned into a ton of different HBR books around the world. If you are in an airport and you are going through one of those spindly little bookshelves on Harvard Business Review books, it's in, that article is in there. It's in lots of books and lots of languages and hundreds or thousands of airports around the world. And no, I never got a dime for that, but I was just happy to spread the love and the idea of reading. And part of that love, as it kept deepening, eventually evolved into this podcast, where from March 31st, 2018, all the way up to September 1st, 2031, for 333 straight new moons and full moons, we're gonna together, me, you, and our guests, fly around the world and uncover the 1,000 most formative books in the world. This has a high potential for ODing. I'm trying my best to keep up with reading all 3 books before I chat with each guest. It's sometimes possible, sometimes not. But either way, I'm loving the conversations. I'm loving the fact that it's forcing me, and hopefully helping to force you, into the idea that nothing in this world still competes with the amount of compressed knowledge you can gain from a book. The news doesn't compete with that. Magazines don't compete with that. Certainly social media doesn't compete with that. It's books. And the richness and depth of those tomes, those sort of thick, stapled together things, ends up turning into, I hope you agree, interesting conversations. We have had conversations, as my child screams in the background here, My wife Leslie's just walking over to change his diaper. That's going to happen on this show. Why? Because we're no ads. We're no sponsors. We're no promotions. We're no commercials. I made the choice to never interrupt our conversation with telling you about my sweat whisking underwear. In exchange, you're going to hear a crying baby in the background once in a while because I'm operating out of a backpack of wires, people. That's all we got for the show. We sure will fly to people and we'll sit down with them. But, we're never going to have the super, super high-end fancy like YouTube videos as many amazing podcasters do. Where was I? We're using the books to enter into amazing conversations like the one we had in Chapter 5 with Gretchen Rubin, author of The Happiness Project and host of the incredibly popular podcast Happier. She just got back on a big tour around North America with her sister Elizabeth Kraft for that great podcast Happier. If you haven't heard of it, check it out. 2, Chapter 18, Chip Wilson, where we flew out to Yale Town, a neighborhood in Vancouver, to sit down with Chip, the founder and former CEO of Lululemon. A great conversation about how he saw this emerging trend, how he capitalized on it, the entrepreneurial spirit, what turned this man from a farm boy in Alberta into the billionaire head of a global company. That was interesting. All the way back to most recently, Chapter 32, where we went to Natalie Telfer's couch in Toronto to hang out with the viral mom truth-saying sensations that are Kat and Nat. Coming hot off the heels of that one, we are going to head down now to Philadelphia and then to enter the Bach building, that's B-O-K, where we sit down with, oh my gosh, what is this guy? He is a hip-hop artist, he's a rapper, he's an author, he's a producer, he's been called a polymath. We're going to sit down with Raj Haldar, also known as Lushlife. As I'm starting to read more books, I'm also going to more bookstores, and most recently I went to Type Books in the Junction neighborhood of Toronto, and I stumbled upon this book at the front cash called P is for Pterodactyl, the worst alphabet book ever. A blue bordered, hand-drawn picture of a pterodactyl wearing what I have learned is a turban with a gigantic green, like seashell-y kind of, I don't know what that is, an emerald in the middle of it. P is for pterodactyl. I'm like, but pterodactyl doesn't sound like it starts with a P. So, of course, I flip open the book, and what do I discover? I discover there's a page for every letter. Like E is for you. Eileen the ewe was so euphoric the wolves were eaten, she even gave the eulogy. Okay, or how about this one? T is for tsunami. The charging tsunami washed away all of Tchaikovsky's tchotchkes. Oh boy, there's no wonder why this sort of independently do-it-yourself, scrappy produced book picked up by Sourcebooks has become an instant New York Times bestseller and has stayed there every single week from the week it came out to the time I'm actually recording this introduction now. P is for pterodactyl busts open the concept that kids are always suspicious of, which is, what are these adults trying to pull over my eyes? And now we're going to sit down with the author and producer and rapper and hip hop artist, Lushlife, and open up some of these concepts. Things like, how do we speak out against established societal norms? What is polymathism? Raj is described as a polymath. How do we develop that skill? We talk in depth about this. It's a fascinating conversation. Builds off a currently popular book called Range by David Epstein. The idea that, no, it's not about 10,000 hours of specialist work and learning how to play the cello when you're 2. It's about being open mentally to a wide variety of things. But how do you do that in your life? We talk about that. We talk about hustling, building your side hustle, betting chips on many different hands. We talk about imposter syndrome. And of course, we uncover Raj Haldar's 3 most formative books. Now let's head down to Philadelphia to the Bach building and sit down with Mr. Lushlife himself. Let's go. Okay, we're recording. Hi, Raj.
Hey, how are you, Neil?
Good. I'm great, thank you. And should I call you Raj?
Yes. Yeah.
Like, because your name is also Lushlife.
Yeah. It's a sort of strange sensation when, you're in the airport and you hear Lushlife and you kind of intrinsically turn around, you like realize, yeah, that is my name to not only a lot of people, but to myself too. But, you know, interpersonally, I still prefer Raj.
Raj, yeah. Did you call it a stage name? Is that the right word?
Yeah. And, you know, it's funny, like a decade plus on, you know, it is very much a real name for me. But like, you know, I think about it and I'm like, it's just this sort of slightly silly thing that I pulled out of a hat in my 20s, and it has some meaning. You know, it's a reference to a jazz standard that I really, really sort of loved, and just generally paying homage to jazz because I don't necessarily work in the genre directly, but as a hip hop artist and as a musician, I study jazz and love jazz and really take from the idiom and the process of creation in the way that jazz sort of upholds sort of thinking in the spur of the moment, and that's what we do when we freestyle.
See, I thought it was like living a lush life.
Well, I do that too.
Because what's the connection to jazz? Like, so lush life. What's the jazz? What's the jazz connection?
It's the name of a standard by Billy Strayhorn, who recorded with Duke Ellington. It's been the song
What's a
Lush
standard?
Life.
A standard is a song.
A song that's become so deeply part of the canon that like standard, right? And you know, there's a book called The Real Book. It originally was, you know, just photocopied pages of lead sheets, just the basic melodies of these standard 200 standard songs, of which Lush Life is one of them. And so jazz players would show up to a gig and have the fake book with them, the real book. I won't go too deep into the sort of history of it, but yeah, you'd have all the standards in there, and it had just enough information about each song that you could comp the chords if you're a guitarist, play the lead lines if you're a sax player, and everybody could play together. And all the standards are in there. That's a great book. I mean, it's not one of your 3 books. It's not one of my 3 books,
but it inspire your moniker / stage name.
It did, yeah.
And I was thinking about stage name because I was like, I have a friend named Humble the Poet. I don't know if you know him or not. So his name's Canwer Singh, and I'm like, hey, Humble or Canwer, like, what do people call you? And he's like, it's totally organic. It's like from the time I came up with this name, people I met afterwards call me Humble, and people I met before call me Canwer. And I was curious, and like, it seems like stage names are more popular now. Like, I think about like Drake or someone. Like, do people call him Drake?
They don't call him Aubrey.
They don't call him Aubrey? Right, yeah, good drop there for a Toronto guy. But like, even just like, you know, even me, like I'm a writer with an unpronounceable last name, right? Neil Pasricha. And it's constantly an issue, like, you know, but so I look at someone like Gary Vaynerchuk,
right?
And he's changed his name to Gary V.
Yeah.
I can't do that because Neil P doesn't work, but there's something.
That's not too bad.
I need your help. I need your help on coming up with a stage name for myself.
Yeah, I really, having had a stage name for a decade, I gotta say, I like going by Raj at this point. Sometimes there's nothing more elegant than the government name, you know.
Your name's also pronounceable.
Yeah, it is.
Haldar. Do I say it right?
Yes.
And so, Raj, can you situate us? So, like, we're in South Philadelphia. Just tell us, like, zoom in from like an outer space for people listening. It's like, what is this part of Philadelphia known for? And tell us about the Bach building where we're sitting and this amazing, gigantic old classroom room. Can you just give us a visual landscape tour of where we are right now?
Yeah, so we are in the heart of South Philly. It's a neighborhood that I've lived in for a decade. And it has shifted and changed like a lot of urban spaces in so many ways over that last decade. And we're sitting in, I think, a really interesting space that's emblematic of all of that change. So we're in the Bach building, which was...
BOK.
Yeah. And it is a massive... at one time, it was a technical school, a technical high school. And for the vast majority of the time that I've been in this neighborhood, it was completely disused and derelict. And about maybe 2 or 3 years ago, they started having this wonderful party on the roof where you can see all of downtown Philadelphia. It's one of the best views.
Because there's no other really tall buildings around.
Right. So South Philly, the sort of urban topology of it is that it's like all row homes. So there's no like huge tall buildings that get in the way of this downtown skyline from here. So they would have a pop-up bar sort of thing on the roof, and it was gorgeous. And that's
Who's
sort
they?
of there's
Like when you have a derelict building in your neighborhood, how do you come up with the party on the roof?
I've heard that it was the. Don't quote me on this. This is just hearsay.
No, we're not recording
the daughter of a developer.
Okay.
Who somehow was able to create this situation, and then I think she subsequently bought the whole building, and so now what we're sitting in is this really cool coffee shop that's next to a bike store, which is next to a butcher, and on the roof there's a beautiful restaurant with those same views. And throughout this building that's like basically one city block, there are amazing artists that just have their own spaces and workshops. My friends from the band The War on Drugs have their rehearsal space in here.
Oh, War on Drugs is in here.
Yeah,
that's huge.
Yeah.
Well, so that's amazing. It reminds me of chapter 20 of $3 I went down to a neighborhood in Brooklyn, I guess called the Warehouse District, or something, with Debbie Stoller, the founder of Bust magazine. And similarly, it was like an old warehouse turned into, but this is an old school, turned into like, a Regenesis. Right behind you is like a huge, I guess, mockery of an old school bookshelf with tennis rackets, trophy cases, like old cheerleader horns, giant old schools. There's like old sort of like card catalogs.
And I think the thing that's kind of amazing about this space for me is like, this is truly like when I first walked in here, as in my like early 30s or whatever, mid 30s, going to a party, I hadn't really been inside a school or the kinds of school that I grew up going to since then. So to like walk through one of these old like mid-century auditoriums, it really sort of brought back this like wellspring of feelings. And I think you kind of feel that walking through here. Like there's just these sort of old wash basins.
In the corner,
just hanging out over there.
And even to my left are like a series of 3 like wooden, almost like chairs that would be in like the auditorium or the theater of an old school.
Right.
The windows to our left, or to my left, to your right, are like gigantic pane windows with the really thin metal like fencing on them. I guess to prevent rocks or whatever from breaking them. So this is cool. We're in like an old school turned coffee shop / revitalized property where bands like the War on Drugs practice and people have their own startups and stuff.
Yes.
So thank you so much for inviting us here. So this first book, I'll just give a quick overview for the listeners, and then I'll turn it over to you to tell us about your relationship. It's called Rhymes of Whimsy, the complete Abel Tabel.
Yes.
Did I say that right? By Sukumar Ray. This translation is the first complete English translation ever published by Hayton Cross Press in 2017. The Abel Tabel, which is in Bengali literally means the weird and the absurd, is a collection of Bengali children's poems and rhymes composed by a man named Sukumar Ray. First published in September of 1923. It consists of 46 titled and 7 untitled short rhymes, all considered to be in the genre of literary nonsense. Sukumar Ray lived from 1887 to sadly only 1923, where he got a rare infection and died. He was a Bengali poet, story writer, playwright, and editor from the Indian subcontinent. And the amazing thing is, and this is kind of the amazing thing about this book, is that hidden in all of these poems are these subversive political commentaries about essentially the British leaders who have taken over India and I guess Bengal or Bangladesh. You can help us geographically kind of place this. And it's now been compared. It's being compared to things like Alice in Wonderland and things with all kinds of hidden absurdity in it.
Yes.
So guys, file this under 891.4 and Dewey Decimal. That's modern Indic literatures.
Whoa.
The cover is an Inspector Gadget-like guy climbing a hill up to a super colorful exploding tree drawn by Sukumar Ray 100 years ago. So Raj, tell us about your relationship with this incredible book called Rhymes of Whimsy, the complete Abel Tabel by Sukumar Ray. And by the way, Abel Tabel is ABOL Tabol. Abel Tabel. I'm probably saying that wrong. By Sukumar Ray.
This was a tome that through which my parents came to America in the mid-70s.
I just met your parents.
Yes, my parents are hanging out with me here today.
It's so gratifying. And by the way, your mom, I shake her hand and she's like, my name's Sunita. I'm like, that's my mom's name. Anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you. But.
No, it is funny. They've gone for a walk, but they could sort of provide some context here, but I will in their stead. But they moved here from Calcutta, West Bengal, in the mid-70s. I have an older brother. He had just been born. And I came around in the early 80s. And my mom really always had, and, I thank her for it now, but like steadfastly would try to impart as much as she could about our Bengali culture to us. On Saturday mornings, she would teach us how to read and write Bengali, and I don't remember too much of it now. I just got back from India, and I can read in Calcutta. I can read, I guess like the sign on a bathroom stall or a
what language?
Bengali.
In Bengali.
Yeah.
And Bengal. Sorry to ask this really dumb question. Like what? Can you just?
Yeah, so
Bengal, because I tried researching it, but I'm like, I didn't quite realize that it was the third largest ethnic culture in the whole world.
Yeah, that's so including what after partition became Bangladesh. But on the India side, West Bengal, where our family is from, is the other side of that. But we speak a common language, which is Bengali, as with the folks in Bangladesh. Our West Bengal's culture is really...
In West Bengal, when you say West Bengal, you mean...
It's a state.
The non-Bangladesh...
Not exactly.
Part of Bengal, which is a few provinces within India, right?
Yes, exactly. Yes, it's a state within India. We are home to Rabindranath Tagore, whose Gitanjali was a Nobel Prize-winning piece of poetry. I think we have the largest concentration of Nobel Prize winners coming from our state. I just saw that
300 million.
My dad sent me a meme,
of course.
So that was like we'd have to check the accuracy of it, but that's what
my
I
dad
read.
Still cuts out articles from the newspaper. It'd be like about the CEO of Microsoft, like a totally He'd be like, "Look, the CEO of Microsoft is Indian."
Right?
Like it's like here's the article.
Yep. Listen. So
Bengali culture,
Bengali
West
culture.
Bengal. Your parents came over in the 70s.
Yeah.
Take us back in there.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So early 80s. I'm born. There is this Bengalis kind of are generally known for being like armchair philosophers. They're very sort of like, we're very, I think, sort of in a self-aware way, sort of, intellectuals. And that propagates itself on some level, and but anyway, just like any immigrant people, my mom wanted to really sort of make sure that, especially myself, who I wasn't born there, and I didn't spend too much significant time there growing up, that I sort of had a connection to the culture, and so she would teach us.
You're in New Jersey at this time.
We're in Jersey, North Jersey, and grew up in. There was an Indian community around, but it was kind of it was sort of diluted at where we lived. Like I didn't grow up, in Brampton, Ontario, as we were talking about before we started recording. Where there's in Jersey there's a place called Edison where it's you could open your eyes on the main drag and be like, am I in
India or something,
right? But anyway, I digress. So Abul Tabul was, for whatever reason, the vehicle through which my mother and her group of friends, chose to teach us kids how to read Bengali. And it is, it's so funny looking back on it now, but it is sort of a strange choice. So culturally, it makes sense. It's a very important sort of piece of children's literature, and in the same sort of, I would say, the same vibe as say Lewis Carroll, you'd mentioned. But like, it's some pretty surreal stuff. And like, to use this,
you flipped one open. Are you about to read one for us?
Yeah.
Give us a taste or a little flavor of what you're talking about here.
Yeah. So this is the English translation, which, you know, it's in verse, and I think this translation, I've been looking through it. The translations are quite good, and they actually keep a rhyming meter, which is, you know, I think very, very impressive. But so just to give you a sense, this one's called the contraption, and so I'll just read a bit of it. A contraption, very curious built, Chandidas's uncle. Bravo, said the young and the old of sage wrinkle. When uncle had been but a babe, hardly a year old, his sudden cry of Gunga stopped everyone cold. Others gurgle mama, gaga, nonsense and rot. This child coos Gunga. What a marvelous tot. All agreed, should this kid live to be a man, may a name for himself in the world he sure can. Uncle of infant fame has made a device so clever, 5-hour trips in 99 minutes, it'll readily deliver. And it goes on, and it basically describes this uncle, this older man who has created this invention that's essentially just a carrot on a stick that propels him along in day-to-day life. And so speaking to like the kind of like subtexts that you were talking about, this one doesn't have like a particularly political one, but it's about it's sort of just about like you know, technology that sort of pushes itself forward just to the end of creating technology, which is
amazing comment like 100 years ago.
I know, right? This is like, you know, early 1900s. Fantastic way to kind of, in a hilarious way, you know, make that point. And for me, so like trying to grapple through reading this stuff in Bengali was like a very difficult, you know, difficult
Can
sort
you
of
read
way.
the Bengali version?
Maybe a little bit.
I just curious what it sounds like.
Yeah.
Because, like, you know, as you're looking it up, you know, so his dad was the editor of a children's magazine in Bengal.
Shandesh, yeah.
Right? And then he took over after his father passed away.
Right.
He hid these poems in the magazine.
Right.
And it wasn't until much later people realized, oh my gosh, they're all timed to political events and the British kind of overruling our country with dark kind of hidden political commentary that people didn't uncover and decipher till many years later.
Right. And actually it was only when Neil, when you asked me to be a part of this podcast, and I chose this book, and then went back and started reading the Wikipedia article about it, which I haven't, you know, like I haven't engaged with this that much, this volume that much, you know, since I was a kid.
Yeah.
And to start reading, like, oh wow, there's this depth of political commentary in it. That's just like, you know, just another layer of something that I love now can provide me. Like, I'm going back and reading these in that context, and it's fascinating.
Well, I love this one about this like bureaucrat like looking for his mustache all day, and everything's an emergency, and people are helping him find it. And then you realize, and then in the back of this book, because it's so well written, they have like what this all means, and it's like this is an example of the jobs that the British would give to kind of bureaucrats in Bengal,
right?
And they didn't do anything, and so he's like basically pointing out the fact that like, but then they thought they were superior, so he's like actually mocking the whole inefficiency of government, and it's amazing.
I mean, but for me, I would say ultimately, you know, having not known that as a 6-year-old and 7-year-old in the late 80s, it was more about the playful nonsense rhymes and the fantastical worlds, and the sort of like surrealism inherent in these poems that naturally, when, you know, I kind of just found myself working on a children's book, started to come out. And so
you're DJing for the Philadelphia Eagles. You're putting out LPs and EPs on like with your amazing kind of music. You're writing a children's book. And I can see the direct connection from the Abel Tabel to your work, P is for Pterodactyl, this book. And it's like, but like both you and him are like breaking convention, challenging ideals. I mean, on this show, in chapter 22, we talked to Tim Urban about this. Chapter 27, Robin Goodfellow about this. It's like, how do you develop that skill? Like, we live in a world that is more algorithmically airtight than ever before. There's like a saran wrap feeling on all of us. Like you can't choose stuff anymore. How do we, and we're in a school right now.
Yeah.
So you like, help us. Help me. How do we learn to bust out creatively from our ennui? Like, people listening might be in a corporation. They might be in a job that's like the same way. How do we come up with these totally wild and sideways creative thoughts and thinking? How did you do that with your book? And clearly the Apple Tabble has that as an inspiration for you.
I think, on one level, this generational of Sukumar Roy, whose son is Satyajit Roy, who is, I think, he maybe won the first foreign language Oscar in India. He's
one of the most prominent filmmakers of India. I looked him up. He's been, his movies are on Sunday.
That dude, like, you start watching his films and you're like, he also wrote the music, the score for these films. Not only is he a cinematographer and a director and a writer, he also wrote a wonderful series of children's detective novels called Feluda that adults also love. But these dudes were like all polymaths, and I like to, on some level at least, just feel like I'm part of that continuum. But the reality is, like, for me, and this maybe like speaks more to the second book that we're gonna talk about. But like, I come from like a DIY music scene, and I grew up, I think, luckily, on the sort of divide of the, I'd say pre-World Wide Web and post-World Wide Web eras, and so like, I think the democratization of like so many of the tools to do stuff has like liberated this thing inside me where like I was like, I think in the 90s when I was growing up, I was like, oh, I wish I could do that, but can't. And now it's what? Like, I mean, even if I had not found a publisher, could I have executed
released
released a children's book? Yeah, and that's fantastic. And like, when I first started making music, it was, very early on, it was like, can you scrape enough money together to get into a professional studio?
Right, yeah.
Right, that's the whole thing.
Getting a recording session, getting a CD printed or a tape printed, and then trying to distribute it for $10.
And David Byrne in the next book, I don't know if we can transition over, but
Go ahead.
Like he makes the point that like, in the past.
I still want to jump in here.
Yeah, sure.
And then, so the second book, I'm just going to say, then you keep going. How Music Works by David Byrne, published in 2012 from McSweeney's. How Music Works is David Byrne's incisive and enthusiastic look at the musical art form from its inceptions to the influences that shape it, from acoustical to economic to social to technological. David Byrne is a Scottish-American singer born in 1952, most famous for heading up and leading the American new wave band Talking Heads from 1975 to 1991. The cover is bright white font on orange background, huge text, simplistic digital boom drawing, and file this Dewey Heads in 781.1, arts, music, appreciation, and taste. So, sorry, Raj, but that's your second book, How Music Works. Now, do that great transition you were doing from the complete Apple Tabble over to David Byrne's thoughts and How Music Works.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's... David Byrne is one of my musical heroes, number one, and so like to have a tome like this from him is like it's just been a godsend on so many levels. And so many times I'm just sitting in the studio or in my bedroom or whatever, and then just flip this book open. There's so much to glean from it. But he makes a case in this book that like in the current musical sort of landscape as the business exists, that we're actually better off as musicians having, whereas like in the 1960s and 70s and 80s, you'd have 10 very lucky people who get to record for the 7 major labels, and everybody else like pretty much
Top
can't do
40.
it. Yeah, that's it. And that now the process of creating music has been democratized to the point where you literally do not need anything besides a consumer home laptop and any kind of microphone, maybe not even that, to record an album. And increasingly you don't even need to spend too much money to actually get it out and distribute it to people's eyes and ears. And so one of his contentions is then, it creates a landscape where the work that's most creative can rise to the top. And
do you believe that's true though? I mean,
I don't think.
Oh, because I get the cost of doing it is so zero or so nothing, but like, I mean, we all want to make stuff but then everything gets 3 views,
right? So yeah, I mean,
there's not more consumers. Does it spread out to nothing per person?
Right. I think there still is a good case for the best of the best kind of organically rising to at least a level where, now there's not 10 people of millions and millions that can make it. And by make it, I mean earn a living as a musician. But people like me who honestly, like in the grand spectrum of recording artists, like, I make a decent living. Like I'm not, making millions of dollars, but I pay my bills and I can do that in my niche. And I think there's much more room for people like me.
Yeah, the Seth Godin theory of tribes.
Right.
Or the Kevin Kelly theory of 1,000 true fans.
Right.
Having just 1,000 fans that love your stuff so much is enough to make a living off of.
Right.
And you kind of do that, right? Like you were doing so many different things, Raj, but you're not gigantic in any of them.
Right.
And you referred to these people that came before you that are inspirations to you as a polymath. I totally see that in you. I mean, how does somebody like I read in an interview that you gave online because someone asked you, it was this, I'm going to pull up the quote that you said from the Creative Independent. It's like, I think that this is you. I think that's something that all millennial creatives have to contend with. You can't be just one thing today. I'm finding it's been both a creative release and honestly, from a financial standpoint, having hands in book publishing and developing for film and TV and so many different things helps me continue to flourish creatively and financially because there's lots of ups and downs in creative life.
Right.
Here's the key point I thought you made. If you have 3 or 4 different hustles, when you get the downer email on one of them, you can just be like, all right, the other 3 things are still working.
Yeah, there's some part of that. I arrived at having like several balls in the air almost just as a way to shield myself from the stressors of like, as a creative, I would say on a weekly basis, I get, and for the last decade of my, basically my entire career, every week you're getting like at least one email or call where somebody, for one reason or another, isn't going to move forward with one of your projects or has
a lot of rejections.
Some rejection.
For sure.
And that's just a reality of, basically being an entrepreneur on some level. But as an artist, there's this other part of it where like you personally are tied, you are your work, right? It's not like, hey, I just made a new kind of cog and do you guys want to distribute my cog? This is like, maybe 2 years of blood, sweat, and tears of the record that's like, took like all of my emotional energy to like kind of create the lyrics for 10 songs and then, get bad news pretty often. And so I think part of me started to put other balls in the air, almost in a way to like kind of like shield myself from that. So that like
the potential failure of any ball is softened by the other ball existing.
I know. And yes. And it happened sort of organically also because like, just interested in exploring other mediums and like composing for film and television, which I do a bunch of now. And like, that stuff, the commerce side of like my creative pursuits, it's an interesting road to go down, but yeah, it helps soften the blow. It helps me also like feel like, okay, with this kid's book doing great and like with my
New York Times bestseller every single week.
Yeah, it's been surreal. Like it's I think on its 16th week or something. I just I don't even know what to say anymore. But you know, what does that create for me? I'm working on a new record right now, and frankly, it will be by far the most like deeply left field avant-garde piece of music I've created. And I'm not, you know, bound at this moment in my life to, you know, the success or failure monetarily of this record that I'm working on. And it's freed me to just make the record fully that I want to make. And, you know, I don't think I could say that for my previous LPs, though I stand by and love each of them very much. But like through my 20s and early 30s, like I was relying very much on, if not selling records, like touring and, you know, licensing my music for film and TV. Yeah. And when all of that is anchored by like the product of a record, it's obviously going to color the output of it.
And the analogy, Raj, I always use is the number of legs on a table. You walk into like a bar with like a high top table with like one tall leg, you can kick that thing over pretty easily. That's one cash flow. Right. You know, and when I was working at Walmart, I had one job. It was Walmart. Then I started work, you know, this blog on the side. Okay. I never put ads on it because I had the Walmart job. So I could afford it to be artistically free. Then the book started coming from that. Now I had 2 things in the air. Then the speeches started coming. I had 3 things in the air. Then I quit Walmart. Why did I start this podcast? Because I was like, I want another ball in the air, and I want one that doesn't make money. I don't want to be, I hate ads. So I want to do it as just a total artistically free ball, because I'm noticing that the speeches, the books, and stuff, they're paying me now. So you also, at least I think, need to have a ball that's like just for you.
Right.
You know, it's from the essay, The Nature of the Fun by David Foster Wallace, which inspired this entire podcast. But like, do you think about it that way? Like, so you just said your next LP can be so creatively free because you know, the book's on the bestseller list every week.
Right.
You know, how do you ride these waves? How do you balance between them? And I have a sub question, which is like, how does an Indian guy like break out of the being a doctor mold?
Oh my gosh, I gotta ask my parents who are walking around the Bach building here. It took a lot of crestfallen sort of, you know, moves from I dropped out of college and my parents were horrified. I, you know, decided to do music full time and to various levels of success, you know, through my 20s. And, you know, takes a long time for the momentum to really hit. But one thing I really did, you know, learn, going back to this idea of being a polymath, actually, like, being a musician, again, and David Byrne really touches on this throughout this book, but like, you know, I had to be my own social media community manager. I had to, without budgets, you have to learn Photoshop and learn how to create your own artwork. And you have to, you know, you're not going to pay a mastering engineer necessarily for everything. So you have to learn how to master records. You have to learn about, you know, the financial side of things. If you're doing, you know, tour Europe and basically be my own, you know, business and tour manager. You're looking at the
Euro Rail websites. Trying to figure out like how to get from here to here.
Exactly. From one random town in the Czech Republic to another or whatever. And so this is this broad base of skill sets that like only those years in the trenches as a musician could have that I could have amassed through which I could have amassed those skills that are now sort of, you know, I was a project manager for all of my records, and a lot of making a children's book happen is like, you know, having the idea for a book, an alphabet book about silent letters is one thing, but like getting it from point A to like, you know, 3 years later, finishing it, finding an agent, finding a publisher, you know, creating the decks required to pitch it and going out and pitching it to people. And, you know, those skills, to say you were rejected from whatever it was, 17 publishers or whatever number it was, means that you got in front of 17 publishers who were able to give you an answer. Yes.
That alone is a hard job.
Right.
And the other skill I'm hearing you talk about is finishing things. Finishing things is an understated skill.
Yeah.
How do people learn how to grow that skill? Everyone starts stuff.
Yeah.
We all start stuff. Very few people finish things consistently.
One thing, for better or for worse, that was an innate sort of attribute that I definitely have is not letting I might butcher this phrase, but not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good or something, right? Like I'm a perfectionist in my own way, but like sometimes I just know when it's like, all right, like
ship it.
So ship it. Yeah, right. As they'd say in startup culture. And like, you know, there is especially with like group projects, you know, you're only going to reach a certain modicum of like whatever that vision was in the beginning in your head. You get to a point where it feels good enough. It sort of represents the basic things that you wanted to communicate when you started on the book or the album or whatever it is. And
how do you not mistake that for settling, though? Like, what I'm saying is, I'm asking you how you grow that muscle of finishing things. And one of the things you're saying is, well, I just don't let, perfect get in the way of great or perfect get in the way of good enough. Yeah. But then for me, it's like sometimes I get to that point and I'm like, well, this is shit. I don't want to put it out.
Right. I think I would modify that saying and make it like, don't let perfect get in the way of fucking amazing, right? I mean, like, which is maybe one step below perfect.
So your expectations are still super high. Right. You understand that things are not going to be the way you plan them from the beginning. Yes. Yeah. That's still a hard muscle to grow, though.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I actually have realized that there's something creatively freeing also about like, early on, my first couple records, I was like just perseverating over like, what does this snare sound like? And working on like EQing.
Perseverating?
Yeah.
I'm going to need a definition for that one.
Just like overly persevering on like, I think it's like a medical term.
Cool. You're rubbing your arm.
Yeah. Like if somebody's like kind of like OCD about like something and they just continue to sort of persevere against it.
Okay.
I might be wrong about
that.
No.
I love that. Any word that I don't know, I try my best to just ask the guest, like, what does that mean?
Should ask Siri after this. But
persevere, that's a good one.
Yeah.
You just kept going.
Yeah, and you drive yourself a little bit insane, and then you realize like perfect is also like a moving target, and frankly, there's something about immediacy and creativity that gets lost in that kind of mode of working, where you're like, where some of the most beautiful stuff, and the way I've found myself working now is in the kind of like just capturing the moment, kinetic creativity, where in the past I've been like, I'm making like my rap Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon, and we're going to sit in the studio for 18 months and make this thing, and it's going to be, just a very clearly no moment has not been like picked over. And now I'm exploring like just trying to capture what comes out in the moment.
Right. And the benefit of that, of course, is that you just simply take more shots.
Yeah, totally.
Right. You talk to a wedding. I always use this metaphor of the wedding photographer. I'm always like, how did you get these amazing 50 pictures? And they always say the same thing. They're like, I took 2,000 pictures. Right. Like I took a picture every 12 seconds over this whole wedding. Of course, I'm going to have 50 good ones.
Right.
It's proportional to the number of shots you take.
Yeah.
You know, it's like literally, and the metaphor I also love is like Nolan Ryan has the most strikeouts in baseball and the most walks.
Right.
Cy Young has the most wins and the most losses. If you just keep shipping stuff, then you're more likely to hit a jackpot. You're more likely to because you're just taking more shots.
Right.
Sometimes the function's just, we're doing 333 chapters of the show. I hope like 2 of them explode. You know what I mean? Like go crazy viral and everyone's listening to it. But like I won't know which ones it is until I do 333.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, as long as they're the standard, there's a baseline standard there. Yeah, I think it is. I think when I look at my career as a whole, it's just like you never know what's gonna like sort of really sort of strike why the kids book went viral. Like nobody expected it at all. Like you know,
You
from
guys
the
sold
publisher.
out of your first entire printing before it even came out.
Right.
Which is unheard of.
The first printing was like conservative-ish 25,000, and like
That's actually a lot for books.
yeah, I don't. Yeah,
No,
I
it
mean,
is. 25,000 is a lot. Books
but
are a lot smaller
they had
than
to go
records.
back for 200,000 right before the holidays, like, you know, within weeks, like just struggling to get on any press they could because of the amount of orders. But like, I think the point is like that. Yeah, I wanted to make this book, but that's just putting one shot in the air, right? And when it strikes a chord, it strikes a chord. I would say more than anything, I'm very keen as not only creative and an entrepreneur, but to build on when something does hit.
Yeah.
Is like, what do you do then?
Double down.
Yes.
So that's like the Black Swan principle. You know that. So Black Swan is this book by Nassim Taleb, and he says, you know, Black Swan events are these events that are disproportional in magnitude. We think we can explain them in retrospect, but we can't. Like, so after 9/11, everyone's like, of course Osama bin Laden crashed into the tower, but before no one saw it coming. You know, or like how you met your spouse, or the success of the iPhone, right? And he said the only way, like one of the things in the book, the Black Swan, is go to parties, or the equivalent of bet a chip on every number so that when you hit one, you can double it. You can just take more chances, take more risks in life. And then when you have a hit, like you do with P is for Pterodactyl, man, now you got a whole series you can do after this, right? But if it bombed, well, on to the next thing.
Yeah, right. No, exactly right. And frankly, like, you know, my barometer for success as a first-time author, like this is a success on the scale that I couldn't have ever sort of imagined. But like, even if over a year we had sold those 25,000 copies, that would have been a success too.
Yeah,
right.
Totally.
But yeah, so
you do realize the average book sells like under 500 copies, right?
I know. I keep getting like people coming up to me and, you know, being like, so, you know, like, do you have any advice as, you know, an author? And like talking to me, like, I feel a little bit of more than a little bit of imposter syndrome with this, but I have to be like, listen, I have a data point of 1, and this data point of 1 is like clearly an outlier. But you know, I can tell you what I did, but like I'm pretty sure that this thing kind of it built steam on its own, and only almost the way that things can online.
Right.
And
to your point about democratization of creative content.
Right.
It found its home when the world wanted it.
Yeah. No, and I think when I kind of look back on it, partially I feel like I didn't realize this, but I think we created just a meme on the cover that was like very shareable, right? So whether you looked at the cover of the book is basically, it says P is for Pterodactyl, the worst alphabet book ever, and it has this psychic pterodactyl with a turban, as we discussed.
Not wearing a seashell.
But like whether or not you have even opened the book, if you see this cover kind of going across your social media feed, and it sort of strikes a chord in the word nerd in all of us, and you can hit that share button or retweet button or whatever pretty easily, and it communicates something. So
I get it. I'm smart.
Right.
I'm a word nerd. I'm a junk. Like you get, all that stuff. And one thing David Byrne talks about a lot, which is amazing, because is this idea of curation, right? So chapter 5 of the book is called Infinite Choice, the Power of Curation. And this is amazing, I thought, because one of the values of 3 books is, and I didn't know about this book before, is in an era of infinite choice, the value of curation skyrockets. Like I literally wrote that sentence not knowing this book, and they're so similar. And he has these quotes, endless choices, no choice. Yeah, it's interesting. And so much of what you do, Raj, is choosing.
Yeah.
You're a DJ. You are like the Philadelphia Eagles stuff we haven't even talked about, but like, you know, you're choosing what music amps up a whole crowd of people. Right. And I think this is like one of the best, most important muscles and skills all of us can get better at in the future, because the world is, as Yuval Noah Harari would say, like the guy who wrote Sapiens, he's like, it used to be information was power. Now clarity is power.
Right.
Those who can distill and simplify, like say like a Mark Manson, you know, or somebody, you know, he wrote The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. He's distilling.
My fiance's really into that book.
Yeah, well, who is it? You know, it sold 6 million copies. But it's like he's distilling this crazy philosophy into like little tiny chapters.
Right.
So like you're doing this. You're curating. How do people improve their curation skills? How do we get better at choosing? That's becoming an art these days.
Yeah, absolutely. And in Burns' book, he talks about how algorithmic playlists on Spotify have like become like so subdivided into like these, you know, pico genres of like music to like wake up and drink coffee to, and you know, then go for a drive or whatever.
He calls it skillful pandering. That's the phrase on page 151.
I think it speaks, and you know, now a lot of these companies are hiring real life human beings to do a lot of the major curation, and I think that's.
I didn't know that. That's true.
Yeah. My pal Himanshu Heems from Das Racist works for Spotify now, and he's leading up. They just entered the market in India, and he's working on their Bhangra playlist and stuff. And you know, they have editorial teams for every genre, and I think there's something to be said for like, you know, the algorithm can do so much. Even if the algorithm does a good job, I think there is something about us as humans where we're like, I would rather have a human being that I know who's lived and breathed this thing, this genre or whatever it may be, like kind of help curate and communicate that to me, and rather than it be like, you know, well, here are 10 factors about songs that we would
Well, this is the Pandora thing, right? It's like you like songs that have this beat.
Yeah,
so here's a bunch of songs with this beat.
That is a far from imperfect sort of way in which to try to paint a picture of what somebody's tastes are like. I mean, we're far too complex, and music has far too much depth to even if you had like, I don't know, like 100 or 200 of these points at which you're describing music, it's still far too little, and so I think we all end up back at the point where we started, which is with, you know, real human beings being curators. And to your point, given this like infinite stream of content that we're faced with now, human curators become more important than ever. And as a DJ, I think, you know, I've been DJing since I was 11, 12 years old. I was DJing in clubs in New York when I was 17, 18, and like, and curation is at the core of what you do as a DJ, right? There's thousands of songs you can choose, and now with the technology that exists for DJs to, you know, not be using vinyl and use digital technology, there's millions of songs that you can be using, and to create experiences through that is important. And I bring that into the music I make as Lushlife. You know, I was in the mid-noughts. I was, you know, one of the people that was really sort of bringing together indie culture and hip hop culture, and working with, you know, people like Killer Mike, and then on the next track working with Ariel Pink from the indie
You did
side.
that Kanye West Beach Boys Pet Sounds merger, like sorry, what's it, mashup?
Mashup, yeah.
And but the thing I'm still missing, Raj, and maybe there's no answer, is like, because I'm in, like, for example, the writing world, and publishers are curating from everyone who writes a book. 2 million books are written a year in the US, but only 200,000 or something, or 300,000 are published. Then from that, booksellers and book salespeople are curating which ones get sold to bookstores. And then bookstores are curating which ones go on the front display table. Okay, I'm also in the speaking industry. Everyone's got a speech on YouTube these days, but the speaking bureau agent is attempting to simplify and distill, like, here's the top 5 speakers you should get to open your conference. Maybe Neil Pasricha is one of them, and maybe not. But those people are trying to pick a curated list, and they're using the trust in them. So that's the skill. I'm like, how do we grow that skill? How do we, because navigating the abyss is becoming too exhausting.
Right.
I can't Google everything. I don't know what's out there.
Right.
Is it just taste? Is it like, you know what, the guy who came up with This American Life, was his name?
Hourglass.
Yeah, he has this whole thing about taste. What you want is for your taste to exceed your abilities, so that you're always aspiring towards something that you just know is good, but you can't yet make.
That actually speaks to me. I really think like one of my strongest qualities is like I've never been like the best music player in the world. I'm a pretty good drummer. I'm a pretty good guitarist. I'm a pretty good piano player. But the thing I have as a musician, I think, is I've listened to hundreds of thousands of hours of music, and I know how to make records because I've gleaned taste from all of the great records.
And is it a function just of time invested? So the hundreds of thousands of hours of listening create taste?
I think on some level,
people just have bad taste.
Right. No, I think you have to start from a place of sort of thinking about whatever it is you're doing. People are born with, I think, some level. There's something
genetic.
I mean, it's hard to really say, but I mean, at least as a musician, I'll say pretty early on, I was at least thoughtful. I was listening to Michael Jackson when I was 5.
Very thoughtful.
Pretty thoughtful, right? Michael Jackson rules. But I had an older brother. He went to college.
There's another ingredient.
It's a big ingredient.
A taste influencer
I know.
in your life.
If
your parents have good taste in music, you're more likely to, maybe.
Right.
It's the New Yorker profile of the artist, and the parents are like a jazz musician, and the mom was I'm also jealous. My parents are East Indian, like immigrants. They were an accountant and a teacher. I'm like, who are these people? But I once went on a wine tour in New Zealand, and it was in like an old van, and the guy's like, this is the man that owns all the McDonald's in New Zealand, and he's like runs a vineyard. And in the front of this guy's house, which we drove by on the wine tour, was like all these plastic sculptures of like Ronald McDonald and Grimace, and I don't ever, and all the McDonald's characters. It's like a wealthy, kind of mogul kind of thing.
Right.
And the guy over the van speaker says, "Remember, folks, you can't buy taste."
Well, that's true, and I definitely I grew up. I had friends, growing up, would go over their house and their dad has like a record collection, Talking Heads records and stuff. And I was in high school, and you're like, well, I mean, I did not have any of that influence whatsoever. My parents listened to Bengali music, which is all pretty much like ballads and did not have the scope of genre that the kids around me did. But I did have an older brother, and he introduced me early on to the Smiths and the Pixies, and we loved Nas together when Illmatic came out, and so certainly had that early on. But really, I think what it all boils down to is I was never like the best musician, but I feel like even looking back, as like a 13 or 14-year-old, I was listening to some pretty thoughtful, elevated stuff and seeking
what
out.
I'm also hearing is diversity.
Yes.
So the friends' dads or whatever is Talking Heads, but it's also hip hop. It's also jazz. You mentioned from the very beginning your name. Yeah. It's like partly maybe here's the ingredients we have so far: time, influences like older brothers. Diversity is a huge one. Yeah. It's like, and this is part of the problem because in this book, How Music Works, I want to get to the next one, but it's like he talks a lot about algorithms have a tendency to feed us more of what we like. And the view I took from the book is that we then lose the crazy outlier effect. Right. The idea of total random other things that could expose us to new things we love. And I find this in the podcast world too. I'm in the podcast world, right? So you go to the rankings. What are the top 10 podcasts in the world? You're like, oh, well, it's Joe Rogan and Oprah. And so now we're all listening to the same 5 podcasts again. It's like, how do I, and even me as a consumer, I'm like, I want to bust way out there. Yeah. But how do I find them when the algorithm just feed me rankings? Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I think music, just like any other media that we're consuming today, you start to get siloed. If you're listening to Drake in Future, it's going to give you a lot more stuff that sounds exactly like that. And frankly, I still discover a lot of, there's stuff I discover from playlists, but I listen to a lot of radio. And I was just
reading an interview with Julian Casablancas from The Strokes, and he described it like this, and I think it's great. He's like, just
I'm just about to go see them.
I love
the
them
reunion
so much.
on the reunion tour. I can't wait. Keep going.
But Julian said, he's like, I listen to a lot of radio that exists below 90 on the dial. So
what's that mean, below 90?
Like on the
FM dial?
On the FM
so
dial.
88.1.
Right.
Like
and that's where a lot of college radio, non-commercial radio.
I never knew that.
Exists. And I don't.
So in Toronto, I like 88.1, which is a more independent station.
Right.
But I never realized it was band-based.
Yeah. I don't know what the story behind why that is the case, but all of the commercial radio. Right. Yeah. It tends to probably. And so you find a lot of the weirder non-commercial radio that's not beholden to the same sort of machinations as like.
And think about how I found your book. I did not find P is for Pterodactyl on Reddit like most people did. Right. I was browsing through an independent bookstore and it was displayed at the front cache. Mm-hmm. A person's point of view. Like they didn't have to. You didn't pay that person to be on the cache. Maybe your publisher did, but I don't think so. No. They just loved the book and they put it right at the front cache. That's the prime spot in the bookstore, and it represents someone's opinion saying everyone should buy this. Right. Basically, you have your money out. You're standing right here to buy stuff. Yeah. This is the one you should get. Yeah. That's huge.
Yes, and I mean maybe that's an expression of the meme worthiness or like the thing about the cover of the book in terms of what it projects. Like, I think this is something that you want an indie bookstore would want in the sort of the front table of their bookstore to represent who the bookstore might be as a brand.
It's also an argument for independent bookstores, which, by the way, in the era of Amazon, in the retail, are going up, right? So people want more of 40% increase in the last 6 years.
It's fantastic.
Of independent bookstores, which is so counterintuitive to Amazon having the lowest prices on everything.
Right.
But we need ways to bust out of echo chambers.
Yes.
I don't want the Amazon recommendation engine to tell me to buy the tipping point for 20 years in a row. Right. It's like I need some way to bust out.
Yeah.
And so, And so you're helping us bust out because you're one of our 333 guests giving us your 3 books. And we transition to your third one.
Yeah.
Okay, so your third and final book is The Lost Steps by Alejo Carpentier.
Yep.
Okay, it came out by Knopf Publishing in 1956. The summary is: a composer fleeing an empty existence in New York City takes a journey with his mistress to one of the few remaining areas of the world not yet touched by civilization. As he strikes deeper into the jungle, he imagines he is traveling back in time, retracing the lost steps of mankind to a point where the work of so-called progress may be undone. Alejo Carpentier lived from 1904 to 1980. He was a Swiss-born Cuban novelist, essayist, and musicologist, another polymath in your tradition here, who greatly influenced Latin American literature. The cover is like I want to say like a native kind of line drawing of like a very dark-skinned man with piercing blue eyes, green kind of shrubbery or grasses in his hair. Another Neil gets confused, thinks it's a seashell type hat on a green kind of top. This one's filed in 863 in Dewey Decimal for Spanish fiction. Raj, tell us about your relationship with The Lost Steps by Alejo Carpentier.
Yeah, this one, I think the origin, or the how I discovered it, at least in my sort of story and then my self-perception, my life experience is like an interesting one. And like I started flipping back through it. I haven't read it in a while in anticipation of this. And maybe I felt like reading it now. I have a little bit of a different take on it. But I was at a party in my late 20s in Philadelphia. And, in your late 20s, like, you're not worried about what time you're getting home. And I was going kind of from party to party. And I ended up at late at night at the house in Fishtown of a guy who is, I think he's Argentinian or Chilean, but he's a painter and is hanging out with a bunch of people. And, getting towards the end of the night, I was pretty drunk, getting ready to go home. And this dude, just as I was leaving, and it's all sort of a little bit hazy, but maybe in context of what we were talking about, or maybe not, I was just leaving this dude's apartment, and he was like, "Hey, do you want to take this book?" And, you know, I woke up the next morning in my apartment, and, you know, it's like on the floor next to me. And I was like, what happened last night? What is this? You know, and then I'd start piecing it together. And then as I probably didn't like pick it up and read it for like a week or two. I started reading it, and I connected with it on so many levels. Like the narrator, I mean, just on the surface level, like the narrator is a musician who, you know, left doing, you know, pure creative music for doing music in for films or something, and or in some commercial space. And then just to the prose itself, which is like really, really like sort of beautifully Baroque. As you start reading it, you start to realize like wow, like you could take any paragraph from this book and it reads like poetry. It's just incredibly beautiful, and I think Carpentier was the first. I may be wrong about this, but I think he might have been the person who coined the term, you know, realismo, the magical realism as it pertains to.
It's one of the first magic realism books.
Right. Yeah. And, you know, I think sort of, I at least consider my lyricism as Lushlife, as part of that continuum in some sense. My style as it's evolved has turned into something that's, you know, at once dealing with, you know, those very real life situational stuff, but there's always this like this patina of surrealism that exists on top of it lyrically. And so I connected with it on that level as well. And, you know, I think so the book is basically about this narrator who decides to go from what you imagine is in New York City to explore the origins of music in the Amazonian jungle, essentially, and comes away from it sort of realizing that you can't escape your present, because he tries to go back in the end and can't find where he once was. And I think there's like an interesting commentary there about like maybe like our relationship to nostalgia and the past, and you know how important, you know, leaning on the past in terms of creativity is. And I think about that a lot is in the context of even in popular music today. I feel like we've been living in like a nostalgia loop for 80s music for like, you know, more than a decade now. And I wonder like how much of that is informed by like YouTube creating a world where, you know, the past is infinitely accessible at the click of a button. It's like pretty heady stuff. Like, you know, when I was growing up, I say if you wanted to like, if you recalled a commercial from your youth, it would just be an ephemeral thing in your head. Whereas now you're like, you're able to just, you know, with the keystroke, bring up that exact thing. And how does that change
both satisfying and altering your own perception of it?
Absolutely. I mean, our entire relationship to the past has been fundamentally altered, I think, by the World Wide Web. And so I think, I mean, it obliquely kind of touches on a similar idea of like of accessing the past. And you know, in the book, obviously they do it. He does it through this connection to you know, people living in the Amazonian jungle. but nonetheless, it like brings up all these ideas about the ephemeral quality of the past and how it's probably not the case anymore for us.
And like escapism, like he's escaping New York to go into the lost jungles.
Yeah.
Like this appears to me to be in a gigantic emerging trend that we are so desperate to crave the ability to escape from it all, however we define it all. And it's more and more difficult to do so. I love the fact that, you know, even a small example like the Alamo Draft House, like the movie theater from Austin, like they ban cell phones, right? There's more things like that, like, you know, cell phone free zones or meeting rooms. Like literally we got to the point where we have to like actually cut off access.
Yeah.
Because even if you go camping in some remote place, like someone's got their stupid phone out and they're looking at stuff and they're like, hey, guess what movies were nominated for the Academy Awards? So like, how do we escape today?
Right. I think that's like a compelling. So I'm like attached to my phone to like, for better, for like, I'm constantly.
Everybody is.
Yeah, we all are. I was just telling a friend the other day, like I, on a day-to-day basis, still am like just enamored of the idea of Wikipedia and like just being able to like have a random question in your head that in the past you either would have had to go to a library or never could have known, to be able to access, you know, to get that answer at the click of a button is amazing. But at the same time, I think I use creative pursuits as my way to kind of unplug, because it's like my way of being able to be in like a hyper-focused flow state.
Yeah.
And, you know, maybe I'm still like staring at Ableton or GarageBand or whatever on my laptop, but at least it's not like just sort of like, you know, wandering into internet wiki holes and looking at my Facebook feed.
You're saying a way to zoom out of everything is to zoom into one thing. Right.
Yeah. And I've, you know, despite the fact that I work on a variety of types of projects, I do think it is to get any one of them done. It's about like being, you know, having the capacity to just zoom in and focus on one thing. And, you know, despite being, you know, interdisciplinary, when you need to actually get a project to a point of completion, it does take just like this kind of focus with blinders on.
What an important skill to be able to achieve. But also, you know, I sometimes sit in coffee shops writing, and I turn my phone into airplane mode. I turn the Wi-Fi off my computer, and I sit and stare at my screen to like write an article or something. Yeah. But I look around me, and like everyone's like listening to music, answering their phone.
I don't know how people do that.
They're doing a million things.
Right.
And maybe it's because we were pre-internet. Yeah. So you and I, like when we did our homework, we had no other choices.
I just still to this day, like, you know, in high school, like to write an essay, I could never like have music on or anything on or have anybody in the room. I like just have to be sitting there without any distraction.
You get mad at the person coughing in the library.
Right. Yeah. And I truly, you know, because if I'm not traveling, I'm working from home. My fiance is always like, well, why don't you just get out and, you know, go to the coffee shop and, you know, see other people or whatever. But like to do real meaningful work that's not just like writing emails, I don't think I can do it in a coffee shop setting. Like, and partially that's my mind wanders. I'm staring at like other people and what they're doing. And I need that level of focus. And I think at the best moments when I'm working on a piece of music, I'm just in that flow state and so deep inside of it that like nothing else is there. But like it would be hard to get there in a setting where there's, you know, tons of people around doing a million different things. And frankly, I just don't understand how, you know, at least for me, I was just in LA and I walked by a guy in a coffee shop working on I could see that he was working on a script. I was like, how how can you be in the coffee shop do that? But maybe it works for some people. And maybe they're getting some sort of getting something out of the experience of seeing other people in that context. But yeah, not for me.
Raj, this has been a great conversation. Is there any final, because you do so many different things and we've only touched on some of them. I will add like a big introduction to this, talking about all your work, but could you leave our listeners with a final piece of advice, something that is some hard-fought piece of wisdom that you've learned with your many different artistic accomplishments and successes that you'd pass along to those aspiring towards, you know, your level of artistic kind of talent and success? So what would be a final message or two you'd sort of share?
You're only as good as your influences. I think we kind of touched on that, but I feel very strongly like all these books that we talked about today and all of the records that I've listened to thousands of times and all of the wonderful conversations about creativity, art, music, you know, commerce and everything else that's required to create a business around your creative pursuits. All of that goes into making these things come to life. So I think, you know, for me you're a product of your influences, and make those influences good ones.
Raj, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Neil.
You're only as good as your influences. It's kind of like the last line on this show. We always say you are what you eat and you are what you read. Everything we are is a product of our genetic makeup, our physical makeup, our parenting, as we talked about chapter 32 with Cat and Nat, interestingly. And also what we put into our brains, what we are choosing to be our mental diet, how we are spending our time, how we are spending our attention. It was an absolutely delightful use of my time and my attention, and hopefully your time and your attention, to hang out with Lushlife down in Philly. He gave us 3 more books on our quest to uncover the top 1,000. As a reminder, the top 1,000 most formative books of all time are always available at 3books.co, just C-O, no, C-O-M, /the-top-1000. Yes, that is a callback to my blog, 1000awesomethings.com/the-top-1000, where for 4 years I wrote about the top 1,000 most awesome things in the world. Now I'm on a quest for the 1,000 most formative books in the world. Raj Haldar has given us number 906, Rhymes of Whimsy, The Complete Abel Tabel by Sukumar Ray. Number 905, How Music Works by David Byrne. And number 904, The Lost Steps by Alejo Carpentier. I better not be doing some Alex Trebek thing there, starting into accent world. I can't do accents, people. I'm not going to try. I shouldn't try. Maybe the Indian accent is the only one I can do. It's the only one I can kind of do. I heard that one growing up, even though that wasn't a very good one there. So listen, this conversation that we are having over 15 years together to uncover these 1,000 most formative books is like, I'm feeling it. You know, I hope you're feeling it too. It's changing my life. We're getting these incredible phone calls. We're getting these incredible reviews. We're getting critical reviews too, and critical phone calls. We want to play both on the show. But I wanted to just say, once again, I'm like throwing my heart on the table here, and I can feel you throwing your heart on the table too. This is a special connection to people like me and like you all around the world. And no matter where you are right now, driving a lorry in the northern end of England, whether you are selling seashells by the seashore on the western coast of Namibia, or whether you are in a hotel basement gym in Chicago listening to us in your AirPods, we're with you. I feel you. I hope you feel me. And let's continue to have these inspiring conversations. Thank you so much for listening. Da, 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 da. And now, if you're still here, you've made it. You're back. You're in it. You are coming back in to the end of the podcast club. This is the club where at the end of every single chapter of the show, I talk directly to you. You talk directly to me. We play your voicemails. We read a review. We play an end of the podcast club little kind of word of the podcast. I butchered that. I'm going to leave it in. So let's, as we always do, head to the phones.
Hi, Neil. How are you? This is Karen from Michigan. I want to call and say thank you for doing this podcast. Thank you for all the chapters so far. I've faithfully listened to every one. I've enjoyed them all very, very much. I just had a comment, and I want to leave a quote. The comment is that being a minimalist, I like to get my books from the library just because I don't need to purchase all the books, and I like to just, save the environment and keep a little less in my house. So I love the library, and I'm hoping for a shout out and maybe a future podcast interviewee to be a librarian. I think that would be awesome. I also came across a really great quote from Christy Hefner, who is Hugh Hefner's daughter, and she writes, "I find that sometimes when people are unhappy, it's because they don't have the proper perspective on their situation. Happiness can be enhanced on a number of levels, one of which is by being more knowledgeable and aware of other people's lives and the world. And one really good way to do that is through reading. That, apart from just the joy of reading and of having books transport you to other places, can help you feel less isolated and more aware of and attuned to others." I thought that was great. Well said. Just wanted to share that. Keep on keeping on. You're doing a great job. I can tell how passionate and how much you love this. You are just wonderful. Thanks, Neil, and take good care.
Thank you so much to Karen from Michigan for calling in to 1-833 Read a Lot, our real phone number you can dial from anywhere in the world. Karen, on the library thing, amen. I've been asking who I consider to be the world's greatest librarian to be on the show. She has demurred. Is that the right word? She's like, I don't, that's not really me. I don't want my voice on there. I'm like, okay, so we're on a quest right now. We're looking for the best librarian in the world. You can nominate someone who's a life-changing librarian, who's a librarian who's been at the town library. For many of you who, been there 50 years, everyone knows them. They've changed so many people. People go back and visit them. I want that person on the show. I can't picture them quite. It's a bit of a blurry image in my mind. I don't know where they are, but nominate someone. Give me a call, 1-833-READ-A-LOT. Ask the librarian to give me drop me a line. We'd love to get the show more soaked into librarians. Certainly, I'm speaking to a lot of librarians about it. But yeah, let's nominate someone. Who could be on this show? Which librarian should we have? And as for the Christy Hefner quote, amen. Again, beautiful. There's been so many studies done. The scientific studies are always there, right? Like reading improves, activates your mirror neurons. Your capacity for empathy and understanding and compassion goes up. They've done MRIs on people the morning after they have read literary fiction, and they have discovered that, yeah, sure enough, all these parts of your brain that we didn't think you were using, super much, too much, very much, you're using them. You're using your language centers more the morning after you read the books. So I love this quote. When we read, we are less isolated and more attuned to others. Yes, totally. And also, here's the other thing. I think two other things go in here. One is, don't you feel like we're living in a global community now, right? Our community used to be like 100 people in a village, 100 people in a tribe, 100 people, 500 people at my high school. Now it's like all of us. This village is big. And it's flattening fast. And books are one of the few pieces of connective tissue that let us slip in and out of each other's minds. So you can be a young girl on the African plains. You can be the boy in the boat. You can be Margaret talking to God, as we heard from Sarah Ramsey way back in chapter 4 of 3 books. You can be any of these people because we want to be connected to the global village. We need to be in order to understand everyone's views and perspectives and to broaden our own thinking. And we can't be in our 30,000-day lives any other person unless we're reading or feeling what their mind feels. So thank you, Karen. You're making me emotional just listening to your call. And I love the ending I am really passionate about it. I'm going to go up and down, obviously, like you would with any project. But so far, we're more than a year into this. I'm still kicking. I am still loving it. I am enjoying this. It is like a mental feast. Thank you. And now, let's go over to the review of the chapter. This review comes from, here we go, an email from Matt, M-A-T. Name is Matt. Hey, Neil, I recently started listening to your 3 Books podcast after coming across your profile on the Shad website recently. Okay, that's a nonprofit that I sat on the board of for years. Your energy and willingness to engage with your guests with the eye of a novice, asking rarely asked questions such as meanings of words or definitions, makes your podcast a breath of fresh air in the highly crowded podcast space. Your style helps, I sense, lower the masks of the interviewees and allows us, listeners, to glimpse the real person behind the persona. This is not always possible with highly media-savvy celebrities who show us what they want to show us and what they want the world to believe. Hearing authentic people is the reason I have particularly enjoyed your interviews with Sarah Ramsey, Vishwas Agarwal, Sarah Anderson, and Ariel Bissett. Ordinary people doing extraordinary things for love. The current culture of lionizing mega celebrities who have already made it leaves less room for hidden stories that deserve to be heard. Keep doing what you're doing. It's making a difference. Cheers, Matt. And I edited that slightly because Matt then gave me a huge, beautiful list of people he thought should be on the show who are, I reason to be, ordinary people doing extraordinary things. You know what? Amen. What is up with celebrity culture? Seriously? Can we just go on a little rant about that for a second? Why have we suddenly started equating famous with interesting? That is an overlap on the Venn diagram, maybe, but it's not a total overlap. Aren't we more interested in interesting? Aren't we more interested in Chapter 7 with Vishwas Agarwal, an Uber driver who is an MBA from central India, coming over to Canada, and after 5,000 rides has the highest reported rating of anyone, with the last 500 rides being perfect? You know, there's a reason why that story, of course, when I wrote about it on Fast Company, then went viral, became the number 2 listened to or read article on their website. Vish has been asked for TV shows, radio shows. He's doing stuff. It's because the interestingness came first. I agree with you. Lionizing. What a great word. You know, when I was growing up, I gave my friend a poster for his birthday of Joe Carter and Roberto Alomar, and it was called Jays of Thunder, a play off the Days of Thunder, I guess, movie title at the time. Roberto Alomar and Joe Carter were like the 2 most popular Blue Jays. And it was like a big poster, and they were standing like gods with like, you know, lightning bolts behind them, holding their bats and like grimacing. It was like Jays of Thunder. And when I went back to my friend's house, I guess a few weeks or months later, I was like, hey, why don't you have the poster I gave you on the wall? And he said, oh, my dad doesn't let me put up pictures of, like, let me worship people. He doesn't let me, like, put posters on the wall and idolize people. And I was like, what? Like, what are you talking about? And here I am 20, 30 years later looking back, and I'm like, that dad knew what he was doing. The idea that there are people with high follower counts or, you know, that are just famous, for what? Like, for what? Like, for what? Like, most of us aren't famous and will never be famous. And isn't that better? That means you can live your most intentional and rich and meaningful life with the purpose and integrity that you want in the ways that you want to live it, without people pushing and cajoling you into doing things you don't want to do or things that you feel you have to do in order to maintain or grow your fame. That would be exhausting. That would be tiring. That would be such a hard way to live. Unless, of course, you're one of the few people in the world who just get off on that, okay? And that is its thing in of itself, in which case, no judgment. But I agree with you, Matt. There's too much lionizing celebrities in this world. On this show, sure, we'll have some big names on the show, but only if they're interesting. I sat beside like this big name rapper on an airplane once, millions of followers. I won't tell you his name. We had a kind of a fun conversation, and I was like thinking to myself, I'm like, should I have this guy on 3 books? And then I said, hey, do you read? Like, are you interested in books? And he's like, nope. I'm like, yeah, well, that's not going to work. We can't have a conversation about books just because someone's huge. We have to have a conversation about books because someone is interested in learning more about the world. Okay, I said it was a rant. It certainly was all over the place, but I just jumped off the deep end there, off Matt's email, because it made so much sense to me. Thanks, Matt. I appreciate it. What are we going to do now, guys? Should we go over to the word of the podcast? Do we have the energy for that? Do we have the stamina for that? Let's give it a shot now.
Paying homage to jazz, take from the idiom, deeply part of the canon. It's emblematic, disused, and derelict. This like wellspring of feelings in there instead propagates itself on some level. The democratization, perseverating over like beautifully Baroque.
Raj Haldar, a man of a million tongues. This guy's dropping words all over this podcast. So many to choose from. I think we're going to go with idiom. I-D-I-O-M. Idiom. What is idiom? First of all, what does it sound like? Come on, dictionary lady. Here we go. Let me crank the volume up on my computer. Ready?
Idiom.
Idiom. A group of words established by usage as having a meaning not deducible from those individual words. What? Well, it's made more clear by the examples. Like we're in hot water means we're in trouble. You hit the nail on the head means you're exactly right. The boss just gave him the axe means the boss just fired him. Okay, so that's an idiom, but that's not what Raj said. He said the jazz idiom. So we go back to the definition. It turns out there's two definitions. The other one is totally unrelated to the first, which is a characteristic mode of expression in music or art. Right? The first time I read the definition, I was like, well, Raj wasn't using it right because he was saying the jazz idiom. That's not a group of words established by usage as having a meaning not deducible from those individual words, like raining cats and dogs or seeing the light. But then you read number two, and it's a characteristic mode of expression in music or art. Wow. Okay, so two different meanings. Where did that word idiom come from? Well, it came, like most things do, from Latin. Idioma means a peculiarity in language. It grew into the 1580s, meaning a form of speech peculiar to a people or a place. That makes sense when we go back to things like, it's in the bag, meaning it will surely happen. Or she let the cat out of the bag, meaning she told the secret. Let's face the music, meaning let's admit we're in a difficult situation. All those examples of idioms kind of relate, in my mind anyway, to the idea that it's also a characteristic mode of expression. It's how we express ourselves in music or art, such as the jazz idiom. Boom! Of course, Lushlife, rapper, hip-hop artist, mega best-selling author, DJ for the Philadelphia Eagles. This guy's a polymath. Of course, he drops idiom into the middle of 3 books. It is chapter 33 that we were closing off. 10% of the way there, people. 10% of the way there already. As we continue our quest for the 1,000 most formative books in the world. Thank you so much for listening. And until next time, remember that you are what you eat. And you are what you read. I'll see you next time. Take care.